Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Bonus Pod, the companion podcast to the MinnMax show. My name is Haley McLean, and today we have a very special episode, all things GDC, because I'm joined by my buddies who went to GDC with me at the same time, including Janet Garcia.
Hello.
Hi, Janet, and Ben Hansen.
Haley, this is the biggest episode of the year. Get ready for excitement.
I know you were gassing it up on the last episode. I was listening to it, being like, that's all going to be over there. Don't go over there and listen to that. I was like, oh, I better make it good.
It's a weird feeling because it's like, oh, should we just unpack all of GDC on the main show? It sounded like I said the man show, and that's not what I meant. On the main show, the MinnMax show podcast, because it's like, there's a lot to say. But at the same time, it's like, if we have in the headline GDC recap or something like that, I think people are going to fall asleep before they even click on it. But I do think there's a lot of interesting things to say. So I feel like Bonus Pod is the right spot to pack in some behind-the-scenes game industry talk about what it's like actually going to the Game Developers Conference. Tears of the Kingdom panel. Janet, you actually went to it. It was about the sound design of Tears of the Kingdom?
Yeah, it was actually more physics-oriented than I expected it to be. I mean, the title was, I believe it was Tunes of the Kingdom, and it was discussing like the physics in relation to the sound, but they did get into like a good amount of the physics, and just sort of like the ethos of or like what's kind of underscoring the talk was how multidisciplinary making Tears of the Kingdom was, like how many teams were involved and the ways they all work together. But like one of the core takeaways that they like talked about was that it's an entirely physics driven world where like unique interactions can occur without dedicated implementation. That was the core like message of that panel. And then they kind of looked at sort of how they went about that, where at first like they made non-physics objects like, a somewhat static like wheel or like turning thing. And then they're like, well, then if you put a wheel that has like the physics properties and its velocity interacts with it, like it makes the world like fall apart. Like they're like, when we first started making this game, the entire world was broken. Everything was broken. It looked terrible. They're like, why are we making this? It's not working. And they were like, don't worry about it. We're going to fix it later. Like just keep building it and we're going to tool it. So yeah, they made everything a physics driven event, even like recall. So every action and every like thing is physics based so that it can interact with each other. And then sound design was similarly created where they weren't doing something necessarily like, the one example they used was if you created a raft that had like a water wheel or something, like little pins turning. Yeah. It's not like they did Foley work for like, what does that sound like if you have like a little boat? They made the sounds where it's like the individual pieces. And when you put it together, you suddenly have like the sound of an engine. You suddenly have the physics of a car. So it's just that idea of all the pieces are sort of operating. And then when together they can work, and that's how they made it so that it can work in like a cajillion different configurations. Cool. And yeah, they had some fun stuff with the sound design, like through lines of the audio and like thinking of how stuff like they showed like an audio pathway that like exists, but then how it sounds is going to be dependent on the angle of the camera as well. So they kind of had multiple things functioning at once, and then, did the typical thing too, like the distance aspect and all of that. But yeah, like they showed how like the voxels in the game info also had like sound paths through them. So they like showed like, oh, this is an area you can travel through. So that was basically what the look of it, like that's what they were kind of like showing off and talking about.
Yeah.
Cool.
That's awesome. Special thanks to everybody who said hello to me, by the way, that recognized me from Game Informer or MinnMax. And one person who stopped me was a sound designer at Blizzard. And he's a very sweet guy. And he said he went to that talk and he's like, it blew my damn mind. Like as somebody who understands sound design a little bit in video games, like the way they're doing it, it's 1,000 times more impressive than we thought it was. And that's the fun part, is just seeing a company like Nintendo actually be transparent with like, here's how we did it. Because I feel like we so rarely get that glimpse, and GDC is a godsend for that. Like they talked as well about Mario Wonder. It felt like it was a little bit more of like a general discussion, but actually diving into the physics of the sound design in Tears of the Kingdom, it's like, yes, this is knowledge that needs to be out there.
Something else too, and like I'm just kind of, I took a bunch of notes, but if I read them all verbatim, it would be quite chonky. So I'm just kind of glancing at stuff. One thing that they talked about and that they showed off a lot was like math, which I'm sure if you are in this world, you're like, yeah, stuff has math. But like just the degree to which everything was like well thought out and like detailed, like they talked about like the degree of automation that they had within the calculations based on the material. They also did the classic thing of, like, a big part of sound design is capturing the sound accurately, but it's also like, it's kind of like that. I feel like they say this a lot with like poetry. Like when you translate poetry, you're not translating it like as a direct translation, you're translating the essence of it. And I feel like sound design is the essence of sound rather than just pure replication. So even just stuff like, oh, well, these wood panels, they're bigger than they are supposed to really be. It's like not really accurate, but it's because we need it so that players can like stick them onto things more easily. Like if we went for full accuracy, it would like not make sense. But just like the degree to which that stuff was sort of mathed out of like, okay, this is what steel sounds like. This is what these different components. They went like really in depth on certain aspects too, like the portable cooking pot and like the solutions they found for that, and then how that solution led to like players making all these funky things. So it was really, really cool. I'm a huge fan of sound design stuff. So like seeing something that had like that multidisciplinary lens into the ways that like everything is underscored by the same core thought process and making like this really amazing game was just like very cool.
Yeah, oh, that's awesome. Did you make it to the Mario Wonder panel by chance? Mm-mm. Okay, I'm trying to remember what day that was and whatnot. We should point out the line for the Tears of the Kingdom panel.
So long.
Ridiculous. Yeah. Like people are.
Alan Wake was wild too.
Yeah,
really?
It was long.
It was wild. I think low key. I feel like it was longer than the Tears of the Kingdom panel.
It might have
been.
Haley, let me know if I'm tripping.
No, it might have been. We barely got in, and we were at the back of that line.
Of the stuff I went to, my favorite one was actually not the Tears of the Kingdom one, which was really good. But I think the best talk I went to, the one that I felt like was most informative and also engaging and entertaining and just kind of just snapped, was Game Narrative Summit, Cooking with Chemistry, Recipes for Attraction and Narrative Design.
That was just a clip from our Patreon exclusive podcast, Bonus Pod.
You can unlock Bonus Pod each and every week by supporting MinnMax at the $5 tier. It's Haley and different cohorts rotating around, talking about anything and everything under the sun. If you're looking for a more casual piece of content from MinnMax than the uptight MinnMax show with all those squares, you can unlock Bonus Pod in your favorite podcast app at the $5 tier on Patreon, and you help support independent games media at the same time. So if you enjoyed this clip, there's a whole lot more GDC talk and a whole lot more beyond that by unlocking Bonus Pod in your favorite podcast app. Patreon.com/MinnMax with 2 N's. Thanks so much, everybody.